Mofnes Memorial Building. I now call this Joint Committee of Fiscal Affairs and Resources, Economic Development and Programs, and Gaming Committee to order. With that, we now move down to roll call, and under the Fiscal Affairs, I'd like to recognize the members on the committee. We have to my far left, Senator Dennis Mendiola. To my immediate left, Senator Paul Manglonia. I am the chair for the Fiscal Affairs Committee, and to my right is the vice chair for Fiscal Affairs, Senator Karina Magofnia. And then down over here joining us is Senator Selena Babauta and Senator Carl King Neighbors. With 6 members present, we have the quorum to proceed with the Fiscal Affairs Committee. And at this time, I recognize the chair for R.E.D.P.G to recognize her members.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair. For the members of R.E.D.P.G and Gaming, we have to my left, we have Senator Francisco Cruz from the Second Senatorial District, Senator Paul Manglonia from the First Senatorial District. To my left, Senator Donald Manglonia. I'm Karina Magofnia, and I'm the chair for the Resource Economic Development Programs and Gaming Committee. To my right, I have Senator Jude Hofschneider, and I'd also like to recognize our Senate President in the chamber. Thank you. With 5 members present, we have the necessary quorum to conduct our meeting. Thank you, Chair. Are you?
Thank you, Chair. With both committees having quorum, we have the necessary numbers to proceed with today's committee meeting. But before we go any further, I'd like to recognize the staff assisting the committees. We have our 2 councils. We have Joe Bermudez and Antoinette Villagomez. We have our IT manager, Jonathan Diaz, our Sergeant at Arms, Ben Terlahi and Brenda Manglonia, and our legislative assistant, Jolyn Duenas-Sagawal, and our fiscal analyst, Dave Demapon. Thank you all for being here. This is a meeting to discuss House Bill 2395, HS1, SS1. But before we move into that discussion, we would like to open the floor for public comments. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes and state your name and the entity you may be representing today. Floor is now open.
Hafre and good morning. And within Chairman Donna Manglonia, and for Fiscal Affairs, and Chairwoman Senator Karina Magofnia for Resource and Development, right? Yeah, and programs. And Senator Mendiola, Senator Cruz, good morning, and Senator Manglonia, Senator Carl Neighbors, Senator President, and Senator Hofschneider, and Senator Babalta, and the legal counsel. And good morning for everyone. I've been here, and all of you know, several times. So every time there's a committee hearing or joint committee hearing, and it has to do with House Bill 2395, HS1, Senate SS1, to repeal and reenact Public Law 23-12, and for other purposes, I would like to testify and to reiterate our opposition to this bill. My name is Richard Antolan Hofschneider. I am an advisor part-time advisor for the Matua Council, and at the same time, I'm Tototano. I'm a Chamorro. I'm not an NMD, for the record, and the reason why I'm stating that, because it's very important that the 15 million loan that Governor Palacios and Lieutenant Governor Apatang are trying to obtain for the close to 100 million EDA, Economic Development Authority, from the U.S. Department of Commerce for this infrastructure, specifically for Saipan, this EDA project. And I want to put it on record that I'm in support of infrastructure projects. We really need a lot of infrastructure improvement. It's been 48 years since we've become a U.S. Commonwealth, and we still have a lot. We have a lot of sewer systems, especially in Saipan, the capital, our capital, the Northern Mariana Islands, that a lot of the, suburban areas, Kangman areas, older areas that, that they don't have sewer system. And a lot of the homesteads, that are being built or are they're building their houses, a lot of them are not connected to sewer line, and we've been advocating that for many years. Where the Mutua Council for Native Chamorro Advancement, the Tototano, we are pro-environment, because it's the best interest of the Tototano Chamorros if we have a clean environment, because we need a clean environment to survive for the next several thousand years, and we need a clean ocean, the environment in the marine, and the ocean and the land and the sea. The Tano and Tasi are all connected to one. This is a one system. And the reason why I'm opposed to this, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Chairwoman, is because one of the major things being discussed right now in this legislation is to continue to use the earned interest from MPLT that is being transferred annually from MPLT to supposed to be transferred here. But as we all know, that there's 10 point some million dollars, stand to be corrected, 10.4, 10.6 from the previous loan that is being services now from the MPLT interest. And if this bill from this committee is approved and move forward with this earned interest as a major part of this legislation, then it really what you call that, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Chairwoman, is that it will really what you call that oppose what we're trying to do. Out there, we're doing, as you all know, probably we're doing every day and every Saturday at Sablo Market. We're doing petition, and there's a lot of them, and we're heading to Tinian and hopefully on road. I want that it's online, and we want it every year for this earned interest from MPLT to be earmarked directly to each and every one of us and our children and grandchildren for generations to come. Recently, I saw on public notice that now in Agigan, in next to Fitness, the Corrosion Point, are renewing close to 500,000 of Department of Public Land for the next 40 years, and an additional 15 years, and then 40 years with the approval if it comes to your joint session to approve the lease. And that's a lot of money that this, we're not opposed of leasing it out. We're opposed on the value. And DPL has a lot to explain why they haven't been transferring accordingly within the Constitution to MPLT. If MPLT don't receive those money, they cannot invest properly. If we only have 117 million for MPLT trustees to invest, then that's something wrong. We need to have more transfer money from DPL, and now DPL is trying to. There's a pending legislation, Mr. Chairman, Fiscal Affairs, that Secretary Santos wants to earmark $1 million from that as a defendant. DPL is as a co-trustee for this hundreds of million. Wants to have that money appropriated directly to them. And for me personally, and as an advisor, we oppose that kind of outright appropriation. There has to be some kind of procedure to protect the beneficiaries. We are the beneficiaries. I'm standing on behalf of the beneficiaries, and there's hundreds and maybe thousands out there that are supporting us. That's why I need to be up here, because the public's listening, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Chairwoman, and don't get me wrong, and that I support the infrastructure. But the way the Governor Arnold Palacios is doing this is wrong. We cannot go back to MPLT and ask for an additional 15 million when there's a default basically, and they're locking already the 9% from the previous loan. I mean the interest from MPLT to us, and this proposed bill that is in front of this honorable body committee is going to lock it for the next several years. And if you lock it up, you're depriving the interests of our children, Ifamagonta, the Chamorro children, and Tototano, and the future generations. And they need to pay their CUC bill because it's so expensive. They need to pay their car, they need to pay their houses. That's what they do. When they come to Sablo Market, they talk to us, they spend 30 minutes to an hour telling us that they want this money. They don't want the 15 million loan from MPLT. They support the governor's infrastructure project. No doubt about that. But it's the wrong place to borrow money. It's the wrong, and I believe the way it's going to drop down from 7% to 5%, that's against the beneficiaries' interests. So who is MPLT and this body representing? Who are they protecting? Are they protecting the governor's interests and the lieutenant governor? Or are they protecting the beneficiaries, which us? When I say us, that's me, and there's hundreds back behind me, and thousands probably, you know. And I'm not saying this to in a professional way, because this honorable body, a lot of you are experienced, educated, and you understand this DPL. DPL is in a fiasco right now, the way we see it as beneficiaries. At the economic downturn, I just read this morning paper, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Yumo's bill on the gaming. He said the economic is in downward. Why is Department of Public Land leasing, offering to lease land at the lowest economic, and the value is going down? And it's going against us, the beneficiaries, because if they lease it at a very low appraised value, the 3%, it's affecting MPLT's interest to invest properly for us, the beneficiaries. So, lastly, Mr. Chairman and Manglonia and Vice Chairwoman Senator Magofnia, we support infrastructure. Members of the Senate, we support the infrastructure for Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. But the way this is being pushed forward by this administration is wrong. They have to go properly. They should go back to EDA, Department of Commerce, to waive that requirement. They should go back to the U.S. Congress, Congressman Kalili, and go to CDA, as Liana was mentioning earlier. Let them go back to the drawing board, or appropriate from all the taxes. I believe, Mr. Chairman, that you have at 4 o'clock tax bills, several of them today for a hearing. I might come if I'm not busy. But tap into beverages taxes. And I saw a lot of Saipan delegation reappropriating maybe $1 million, reappropriating. Why can't they tap those for this EDA? Why are they going back to MPLT when they're in default?
Thank
They're
you.
locked this. They're locked this from the prior loan. So please think of us. Think of the Chamorro people, the Tototano, because we're not NMD. We're indigenous people here in the Mariana Islands. And I know it's a question of legality and constitutional question, and of course the covenant interpretation. But it has never been answered. Who is the indigenous? And I asked this body to reflect on yourself when you're alone. You don't have to answer right now, Mr. Chairman and Mrs. Chairwoman. Who is the indigenous of the Mariana Islands? And is indigenous, the question of indigenous, equivalent to NMD? Or are they contrary to each other? Are they conflicting to each other? So there's a level of I'm pushing this forward, because whether I appear here or not, this thing will go for the next generations to come. And we have a lot of support on this. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna give me just 30 seconds. And thank you for everyone for listening. And thank you for indulgement for me sitting there in front of every committee hearing. And I don't want to be here, honestly, but I have to be here because it's very important. Those land and those money belong to the Chamor people, the indigenous people. And this body has to address that. We are not NMD. Susmasi, Mr. Chairman Manglonia, and Susmasi, Chairwoman, and we support the infrastructure. I came from Tinian, and Senator Cruz, I support all infrastructure projects in Tinian. We need sewer line, sewer system, and the military is coming in so quickly, and Tinian really is the one that impacted. We need these Senator King neighbors, and Senator Jude's not here, but just give me 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to address the Tinian. We sacrificed 2/3. We're the only island in the entire Northern Marianas chain that sacrificed 2/3 of our island, and they take our land. But not one penny goes to them directly. They're being impacted now. There's no representation from Tinian that speaks for the military, civilian military affairs. It comes directly from Governor Palacios and his representative. So I urge Senator Cruz and Senator King neighbors and Senator Hofschneider, before you decide on this bill, think about it. Because one day you're not going to be sitting, you're going to retire from this body, and your legacy will live on for generations and generations of the Chamor people. They took 2/3 of our land. We got 50 more years, in Tinian. And MPLT is the basis of this. MPLT was born in 1983. And the bombing of NOOS, FDM, and of course the American War Park. Susmasi, Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging the additional minute, and thank you, Chairwoman. And again, we oppose this bill. We support infrastructure, but we oppose this bill. Thank you. Susmasi.
Thank you, Mr. Hofschneider. Members, my apologies. Before we proceed, can we just go back and can I get a motion for the adoption of today's agenda?
Second.
All right. Any objections to the motion?
No.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Floor is still open for public comments.
Semampus takkilu Caesar. Good morning, half a days, and good morning, Chairman Manglonia, Vice Chair Magofnia, Senator Edith, Senator Carl, Senator Babauta, Senator Pauls, and Senator Frank. And I think we could stop at Senator Mendiola and Senator Jude and staff. No, Gohu Siliana Manglonia Sablan Hofschneider, Gaigazugini by Matua Council for Native Chamor Advancement. No, the Gefmegay Pabisangan, no, be repeated talo. But for what? Este mampusa na kuku no gi tempo ko ni gi legislatura ni mafatuzo mo advocate mas de 20 años dyan como empleado loki gini no several years gi legislatura sige mas na kuku na bio federal budget bill I annual budget bill uli ano ganna uzung ani manuzung ami na infafesin I tauto kalan man host to house ami hafay na sunya so todo do sumasangan na masupopot ta hamzu zani gobyerno zan dongkulo na sa susmasi para I amerikano nya na I kontidan salapi ni para malikla siya I tanota sa nigi pinimeti ni covenant zan often naman halumingi gi familia ni American political system. Lo estine bisanga na titodin ko kontra bulan suporta loki no out of estina funding I MPLT giman mapus. Lo imatsugwenya sti latsi sa itutuhan niya 15 million no problema. Pago talo na ora man mangogogo 15 million latsi. U fafaisin amju na bula reappropriation pago masasasali sa papa na guma no deste itinutunisakan gi mapus na sakan sa pago no kantida no mizon put mizon man reappropriate no salopig in i bond infrastructure no interest gi Commonwealth Development Authority or Commonwealth Economic Development Authority pago zan puri casino. In fact, gatalo sa lapi no gisang papa na alum si Congressman BJ no po prospectively po reappropriate it's fees ni man manananga gini ni casino. So fa-face namju na todo izi papa ni na funding ni man reappropriate parewa lo kisolili infrastructure. So no siya infrastructure ko emergency so ani priority ko sa mga nizo uni izo meeting sa ni defense nga color code kasi state of emergency. Tapos color code ni ko red, yellow or green. Ja leleku na station infrastructure está no 4 years, guasya man 4 years, maybe para mas. Debi sa 20 color code red. So si pago may reappropriate gi papa na guma, faisi ni lower house da information concurrently resolution tap tamano sa mizo para budget no faisi na amzo man amzo man fafazin mizo sti na information gin sa papa na guma ng sili din sa no enwa no iotu ultimo pabi faisi na amzo penatan is sa ma-include is non-profit EDA non-profit para sports no complex dan cultural part. It's na pati ni una sita narrative. Aga sugago si Codep disi pago tanan na izo esta mosquito stress 4 anyo sugago. Muju nga ma-replace at yan ni narrative of agina una sita narrative sa ningayan ni federal ni nai sa lopi antum pega narrative gunya. Zedzi na papa na tonu ikatan uda para amzo ni tutu ikatan uda many years ago pumatuli zin izo niya investor si Shakir distezi pago mafananan Coast Restaurant o todo katan esta Kilili Beach lo idzo na ay no lats so idzi manus park children's park daok pues no estinebu na ginago nisti EDA 21 million all the way katan gi Kilili Beach lo idzo na tempo esta pa mana esta pumafit 5 years pa di exploratory za tinatitizi ni 40 years then 25 years it's na tono ni ame kumontra sa pamakilas ta ni investor para ice skating rink lo utungan na ti para ice skating rink it's mandadagya. Anyways, thank God si Zeus Masentinya si chairman Blanco sa ni zoning board then si former Lieutenant Governor Pete Tenorio, giza no acting DPO secretary, na ikungo kami the right away designated para park. So no kumuti edzo na tempo ning kontra ni go sa last minute tagini ni no man makto ami sa po mafitma man kalangwa di contentious sa ni board member ni si Difunto Diego. So we were ready to go to court esta pasagan si DPO na isa ma-move para park. So pago that's that same property that's now going to be EDA's 21 million the thousand narrative asufan no kumaga na thousand narrative na po na ida 21 million gabi na Amerikano. So nasita zudun mizu o nasisita zin na narratives it's na lugar ma-dedicate para Chamorro Cultural Village za si no architect University of Hawaii Graduate School of Architecture si Mr. Songsung Brat Songsung or Brian anyway Darrow Songsung, I'm sorry. Darrow Songsung, I with all due respect. Si Darrow Songsung is niya architect. So enwa atan idzu ko kontra istinabio the way this as it is a reenactment repeal and reenactment context parewa in ko kontra sa tidinansin na pamsulit sulapi tototano zan tano tototano sa panatistigo this is smasi.
Thank you, Ms. Hofschneider. If there's no one else, we will now close the public comment portion of the agenda, and we will now move on to the next item, which is new business. We have we have invited Secretary of Finance as well as the Administrator for CIP and Acting Director of OPD, Ms. Elizabeth Balahaja, to join the committee here today. And so at this time, if I can invite both agencies to join us in the chamber for some open discussions on current projects and some of the, we'll allow the members the opportunity to ask questions on these projects in order to help uh, come up with the decision on how to proceed with the current bill up for discussion. And so at this time, if I can have the two entities join us here this morning. Thank you both for joining us again this morning. I guess before we proceed, the main concern that members have relates to the CIP projects, especially on Rhoda and Tinian. And I understand that in prior discussions with Ms. Balahaja, a lot of the delay is coming from the NEPA process, the NEPA approval. And so if Ms. Balahaja, if you can explain more of the cause of these delays and what steps have been taken to address these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of this body. My name is Elizabeth Balahaja from the CIP, and we administer the 702 Covenant funding, which provides capital improvement program money for the islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Rhoda. The question now is, why is it taking long for projects on Tinian and Rhoda, and in fact, even on Saipan? And why is the NEPA process a complicated process? Well, first of all, the way we operate at the Capital Improvement Program is every year we communicate with the mayors of Tinian and Rhoda and through our CIP office, and we request for projects that they wish for us to pursue. When we get those projects, we develop a proposal to OIA. We take a look at what kind of environmental impact that it could have on the project, and we submit a proposal to OIA. OIA approves the proposal and provides that funding on an yearly annual basis. So annually, OIA provides about close to $8 million to the entire CNMI. For the NEPA process, it is a requirement, and for every federal grant, they have an environmental compliance. So the NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. For OIA under the Capital Improvement Program, the Army Corps of Engineers is retained as their consultant to perform all NEPA process. What we do on our side is we connect or we interact with our regulatory agencies, and we inform them that the municipality of Tinian is undertaking a project at West San Jose subdivision, whether it be water line or power line. And then we submit those letters to the regulatory agencies, and we submit it to OIA and Army Corps of Engineers. Then it's Army Corps of Engineers who looks at the environmental impact. Now, in the past, and I know it is a very frustrating effort, and we have communicated this with OIA because our grant is also competitive. It depends on our expenditure rate, and it also depends on our entire financial situation in the CNMI. And one of our complaints really to OIA is like, so if you want us to expend the money, well, then help us with the NEPA process. Because in order for them to authorize us to use the money, they must get a recommendation from the Army Corps of Engineers that all the environmental concerns are being addressed. So for Tinian and Rhoda, we had a situation where our projects are to provide a water line and power line for the West San Jose subdivision. And then for Rhoda, it's the Doogie water line, which connects to the Doogie homestead. That's by the airport. At one point, we were providing all the necessary information that Army Corps had requested for us. And then one day they says, well, because it's a subdivision, we need an environmental assessment report. And the environmental assessment requires biological and all the others archaeological. Now, public lands, when they open up this homestead, they had developed an environmental assessment, but it is not in compliance with the NEPA requirements. So that's what we're taking now. So what we're doing now at the CIP is we just retain the services of an environmental consultant to assist CIP in dealing with this NEPA process. And that's what's happening now with the Tinian water line and Tinian power line, and also for the Doogie water line. So, Mr. Chair, I think that's where our status is right now. CIP has retained through the procurement process Mr. John Gurley, and we've also been coordinating with our project engineer for Rhoda and Tinian doing these projects so that they can come up with all the requirements for the NEPA process.
So I know you mentioned the issues with the Doogie water line, but what about the Tinian water project?
That is the West San Jose subdivision, which is both water line and power line.
And that one needs more documentation submitted?
I think both needs the environmental assessment.
And what's the issues when conducting these environmental assessments?
The issue is that we need the capacity to do it. And so that's why we hired an environmental consultant. The other is, they still need to do some field work probably. And I understand from the water line, the San Jose West San Jose subdivision, that they may be able to use some of the information that DPL has already done so that we don't duplicate the work. And then communicate with the NEPA reviewer, which is the Army Corps of Engineers.
So assuming all these concerns are addressed, all documentations are submitted, are there any challenges in regards to getting approved or getting
If they meet all the requirements, there may be conditions that may be found, such as endangered species or whatnot, but those should be addressed by the environmental assessment. From the regulatory agencies also, there should be conditions. I mean, it could be a condition that proceed with the construction with the condition that monitoring will be required. And, it could be with any construction project.
Thank you. Open the floor to any of the members. Recognize Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dimbalaj, I know that you're aware that we've been discussing this for the past almost 2 years with the West Indian San Jose. And we're wondering, as you mentioned today, we're wondering where we at now at the time, because it's taking so long, and I am not aware how long is this NEPA process. And you understand that we commit the $2.5 million already to that project. And the reason why we request for your presence here because of the bill at hand that has a provision of 30 days payment plan, or to pay within 30 days. And I mentioned to the members in regards to the
if it's possible with 702 funds to be able for us, Tinian Road, to be included in that bill for Tinian Road to push forward with project. But I'm very concerned with NIPA process because it's I think it's almost 3 years that we've been discussing about the water infrastructure at Tinan San Jose Village, and nothing is moving forward for that water line infrastructure to be constructed in the area. So I want to ask, what where we at now with that project? Are we still under study, or we haven't even gone to that? Because me and Senator Snyder will visit CUC because they're doing their part also with the A&E, and they're done with that. And I don't know CIP where they're at now, so that the project can move forward because it's taking so long.
Thank you, Senator Cruz and Mr. Chair. So right now, like I earlier stated, that we just hired John Gurley to help us with the environmental assessment. With the design, we did pay for the design for the West San Jose Tinian water line. And, just to clarify that, the design process is totally different from the construction process. When you do a design, you don't do a lot of earth moving. And that's where the NEPA is very concerned when it comes to that. Senator, yes, we've been talking about it. And like I said, our office too has been frustrated about the process. However, I think that, we need to understand this is the requirement of our OIA funding. We sign a grant terms and conditions, and in the grant terms and conditions, we have to go through the NEPA process. In order for OIA to give us what they call an ATP, which is an authorization to proceed, they must get a recommendation from Army Corps that all the NEPA has been cleared. And yes, we share the same frustration. I mean, we've gone through it. I've talked to our NEPA, our Army Corps. I feel like whenever there's a change of leadership, a change of personnel in whether it be Army Corps of Engineers or in OIA, there comes a change also. I feel like there's a change in game plan. And when they told us that you need an EA for this because it's a subdivision, I am not an expert in environmental. And I think that's the reason why we asked OIA, can you give us some money because we need help in the environmental?
So that means 2 years ago, you don't hire that individual to help.
Because we were under the impression that we were providing them information that could have led
No, but,
to an approval of the NEPA
but Ms.
process.
Belanza, I think the leadership team should know what's going on so that we can continue the discussion into how we can move forward with the project. But the leadership don't know anything about where we're at right now. And that's why I mentioned to the members in regards to 702 funds that is going to be in this bill. It's useless having that if it's going to take more than 3 years because the bill says 30 days. So I want you to be clear. Can this be able can we be able to use 702 in this regards, in this kind of language in this bill or not? We want to be clear on this because it's useless to putting 702 in this bill and it's not going to work.
Senator, I agree with you because the 702 funding does not require us to upfront the cost. We charge against our allocation, our grant. So we don't need, EDA is the only grantor now that we're operating for CIP that requires that we put up the money up front and then get a reimbursement. For 702 funding, for FEMA funding, we don't. Some of the grants and terms and conditions allows us, especially for design and construction, that we charge against our grant.
Thank you. That's what I want to hear because, like I said, it's useless having this language in here. And the reason why we try to go that way because Tinian and Rhoda are left out from the EDA opportunity. The assessment was done, but it's not included. I don't know why, and I don't know whose idea not to put because EDA is cinema wide opportunity, not just one senatorial district. So we try to use 702 if it's possible. But thinking about EDA, I mean, a NIPA process, I don't think it's possible. So I want that to be very clear from your office that we cannot use this. So it's clear with the Senate here that it's not going to work. So we will try and find other way to make it work other than 702 funds. So the reason why we're asking that in the beginning because we don't have EDA project for Tinan and Rhoda. So now that it's very clear that it's not going to work, so might as well it's not supposed to be in this language because it's useless having this 702 fonts in here and it's not going to comply with the provision of 30 days. So that is very clear now that it is not going to work. But like I said, the reason why we requested for Tinan to ride in this vehicle because we want our project to move forward and not wait for 3 years. And with this regards, it can help us move forward with our project like the Tinan Marpo Heights homestead expansion for water infrastructure and the road and among other. We have a lot of project that's supposed to be an EDA grant, but I don't know whose idea is that not to include Tinian and Rhoda. And it was very clear that the mayor said that EDA representative from the mainland came and he said the mayor cannot directly request for that. It has to be that state to submit that, not the municipal level. But the state never considered putting Tinian and Rhoda in that EDA request. So that's why I'm asking the consideration in this body to consider Tinian and Rhoda in at least a minimum amount for Tinian and Rhoda project to move forward and not wait for 702 3 years of NIPA process because it's not going to happen. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. I recognize Senate President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Liz, and good morning, Secretary of Finance. Thank you for coming this morning. Liz, you had mentioned about expenditure rate and financial status of the CNMI. Are you referring to the expenditure ratio of the CIP monies? What percentage threshold is the requirement of OIA, if that is what we're talking about?
Senate President and Mr. Chair and members of this body. So whenever OIA sends us a letter awarding us the annual budget, in that letter, it always says, we encourage you to expend the money annually.
Okay.
No, that's their letter. How do we do it? And that's always been our question also to them. How do we do it when we have to go through all the NEPA process and everything? So they expected us to do $8 million. Well, some construction project, you first need to do a design and go through the NEPA process. Like I understand that Tinian, the municipality of Tinian, we're still going on with that San Jose water line and power line. So I think that's what it's meant. But the expenditure, whenever we have an annual budget, they give us a report card. And in that report card, it's not just the CIP office being graded. They grade also the CNMI government as a whole, including audit.
Thank you. And that will lead me to my next question. So this is handed down to the CNMI on an annual basis, correct? I guess the $8 million comes down. Okay, so within that total pot of money, what is the percentage of local administrative costs that is allowable to be taken away from that $8 million annually? I understand OIA wants us to fully expend it, which is 100%. And so out of that $8 million, you slice out what is allowable for administrative cost. What would be that rate?
I believe it's about 7% of the total grant, of the total budget.
Okay, now if I may proceed with my financial questions. To date, you have another funding coming in, I guess, soon of $8 million. On the books of the Commonwealth, you mentioned our financial status. Going back in other fiscal years, when it comes down to the Commonwealth, have those funds been fully expended? And is that expenditure process, is it the FIFO method or the LIFO method? First in, first out, last in, first out. What is the requirement of OIA? And if we haven't fully expended all the monies that have come down under 702, what is the value today as we speak? The book value of unobligated CIP monies under 702, which is as a result of the NEPA process, the frustrations that we're going through. I think it's important to know what is our current value of those funds to date.
Okay, so also we need to keep in mind that when they give us an annual budget, our period of performance is 5 years. So they allow us to complete projects in a 5-year period. Whenever we can't finish in a 5-year period, we request for time extension.
Okay, so obviously the funding every year comes down, right? And so that's cumulative.
Yeah, so it keeps
Right.
carrying over.
Uh-huh.
What they do is before a grant expires, we request for time extension and, they extend the grant. Or there's a lot of times where we redirect funds. Let's say that a project is completed, we redirect some of those funds to other projects. Like for an example now with the hospital requiring a CT scan, when we had a previous year award for one of their softwares, we redirected that to the CT scan. And so
But it's always based
it's
on
always there.
It's
Yeah.
always based on first in, first out.
Thank you, Senate President, for that question. As far as LIFO or FIFO goes, my accounting understanding is that's an inventory costing method. And so that's not necessarily followed when we are paying out CIP invoices or obligations. So if you're trying to have an analogy to inventory, I would say it's a just-in-time method, JIT. It's when we receive it, we pay it. Right? When we receive the invoice, it's all approved, signed off by the engineers. We request the drawdown, and it's paid right away.
Okay, that's it's
There's
very
no-
clear, the
yeah.
costing method
Mhm.
based on inventory tangible assets. But when we're talking about capital, whatever comes in on a fiscal year, obviously from OIA, I wouldn't think that OIA would say you have not spent this money on prior
Mhm.
years, and you still have that funding cumulatively on your books, and now you're getting an additional $8 million today, the current fiscal year, and there you go. You're going to spend that money now on that
It's-
current fiscal year. Although you talk to all the mayors about these are the projects we want to do, but then you have all this money sitting on the books in prior years. I would think that OIA would want you to spend prior year funding rather than spending current year funding. Because why? The current year funding takes you out another 5 years. So you want to finish off the first year, correct? That would be the proper thinking, I
Yes.
would think. And that's where the application of the first in, first out methodology of expenditure in some grants are like that.
It's actually based on obligation. So each grant award is obligated through the allotment form. It's obligated to that year. And in those obligated funds, we don't receive those funds into the Commonwealth. We don't recognize those funds because it's just an award, right? So the grant that was awarded is obligated to certain projects. And so projects that were awarded last year are tracked for those projects. So when those projects are expended, that money is requested and paid. And then another award that's awarded this year is obligated to
Several
maybe a different project or maybe to support a past project, but they are separated. It's not a pool of money that gets dumped in and then we decide which projects to pay. It doesn't work that way. It's all separated into buckets. This year's award is for these specific projects, the next year, and so forth.
But when those projects are not ready to get off the ground, they're not shovel ready. So those monies are not coming in into the Treasury Department, and you're not
Just
recording
obligated.
those.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just
so you're not
obligated.
recording those on the books, and that's the reason why I asked the question about the initial statement of our financial status. And so does that clarify that particular statement that it does not, because we don't, if it's not obligated, it's not recorded on our
Not
books.
received, yeah.
Is that what we're
Right.
talking about here?
But I think when they grade us as far as financial status, they take a look at the CNMI as a whole. So, the general fund, the audits, how is our financial situation doing in terms of the entire CNMI? That's just one of the grading systems that they put in.
Chair, if my last question for now, you mentioned earlier about, and thank you for that clarification. DPL, they develop their own environmental assessment, but they're not compliant with the NEPA process. Do we ever have any issues with projects that DPL would roll out and later on just issues because it's not NEPA compliant?
No, I apologize. I mean, NEPA has also maybe other requirements that are needed that maybe our local regulatory agencies do not need. So that's why we're taking whatever that DPL has provided and supplementing that and working with the Army Corps of Engineers to make sure that we're with the NEPA compliance.
One last question, before I lose my train of thought. Liz, are you aware of other Pacific jurisdictions that were recipients of 702 monies that are intended for the Commonwealth? And that maybe because we were not able to obligate those funds, that OIA potentially could have diverted those funds over to other Pacific jurisdiction? Are you aware of any of that?
I'm sure they are. I mean, because at one point we were getting 11 million, another point we were getting 8 million. And then you see like American Samoa getting 11 million and us 8 million. Guam is only probably getting 6 million. So, every year our budget really differs. Lately it's been like in the 8 million. But boy, we really would like to, push that up to at least 11 million or however CIP is supposed to be distributed.
Thank you for that clarification. So it validates what I saw many years ago, sitting in a meeting in San Francisco, that there were funds intended for the Commonwealth under 702 that were given to other Pacific jurisdictions, and you named the territories, Guam and American Samoa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senate President. For the first round, I recognize Senator Jude.
Jesus Masi, Vice President, buenos dias and half a day para alguns secretaries and Miss Balahad dyan. No. Jesus Masi nesti na oportunidad talo no. Malaguzo bifaisin namdo esti clarify fan esti grant conditions para i-702. This ni man Commonwealth fit ko ni ma restrict no annual drawdowns. Has it ever been restricted for whatever reason other than redirecting it to another jurisdiction? Taza, no?
Taza.
Okay. Todo tempo gay kabales. Okay. Kada 5 años tanahalum no review of grant pledge agreement or grant requirements. Is there a statutory requirements based on this pool of money to say that it can only be used for certain projects, it can only be used for certain drawdown, to what your point earlier about obligated, not necessarily there in your treasury? Or is there a, I guess what I'm trying to get to, no, gentle ladies, is there's a lot of uh, systemic changes over the last, especially the last 5 years, in the way we do business in the government and everywhere else around the region. And it forces us here as a unit in the CNMI to also be thinking outside the box, no? Say, for example, is the EDA, ne? Tana naman sunetit, no? Especially gini sa ipan. Is the 94 million na mapreba. Just ipaw ko naman ngayon para ta tamtam is na oportunidad ipa ta azo locally. Izotan no MPOT ni pro furnish sizo pumufgi project. Pesa mention si Senator Cruz, idzigin na rason no pati na no na rason na inatan is 702. Ko sinya loki no ta explore na sinya ta usa para leverage sa pagawan sa sangan na kada year 1,000 ifatta. Sa tanafunajan no we can finish a sewage treatment plant on a gradual basis on the island of Rhode Island and maybe use the 800,000 or so to guarantee funnel it over to MPOT so we can or any other local no investment or a grant or a line of credit, no. So the idea is to, if we can use that as to service the loan. So instead of waiting for all the other elements, we can actually say, okay, Mr. MPOT, 800,000 for the next 3 to 4 years. Let's finish the water line over in Rhoda, so that it can first and foremost no, whatever that account amounts up to. They'll be guaranteed na binaposit at least 800,000. I mean, it's the kadasakan. Sinya no ta an option. I know it's kind of a tall question, no? So I keep asking the same. I mean, kind of multiple of question lo. You know, if I seen is the grant agreement gi 702 fund, do you guys like put your inputs, like how you want us to, what is the most feasible way and the most realistic way of spending it?
Thank you, Senator Jude and Mr. Chair and members of this body. I understand your question. And, you know, I don't think that I can guarantee you that 800,000 every year. And I think we need to consult also our OIA, Insular Affairs, on, you know, whether they're willing to sign just like an agreement to say that it's going to be allocated towards, you know, a loan or a process, because, you know, they do have a process themselves, right? So, you know, maybe just this now, it is something that, you know, we can request from OIA to look into. Yeah.
And I think we can guarantee, no, that the rate of expenditure and the satisfactory reports on the accomplishment of each project is really good. It's going to look good in the audit, right? It's going to look good on the CNMI or any other jurisdiction. So in a sense, we're kind of like doing us, everyone, a favor in terms of fast tracking, not necessarily fast tracking, but be compliant, but just to finish the project instead of you know, going through all this waiting period. Understanding of an earlier statement.
I tend to disagree with that, because at the end of the day, it's going to be their grant terms and conditions, and their terms and conditions would be the NEPA process. And so when you use local funds, you don't need to go through the NEPA process. But if we do the project and complete it, will we be able to get reimbursed by OIA? And maybe that's something that we'll kind of look into it and see if that is possible.
Conditions of the grant to say that you cannot use this. That's why I'm asking. We're exploring this option because of an opportunity for us to create a mechanism where we can actually fund an infrastructure project that's needed on both islands, no, on all 3 islands for that matter. And I'm confident that with all the years that we've been getting 702 funds, I think as I said earlier, everybody's changing around the region except, some of the stuff that we do business here in the CNMI in the government side. And we need to reach out to, like what you guys did with in the beginning. If EDA is not supposed to pay for the interest, right? For MPLT, now they do a 180 and says now they're going to be responsible. Isn't that what I'm hearing, Secretary?
Regarding EDA, no, EDA has always allowed interest charges. It's just in the beginning, I guess, I assume that the CNMI assumed that it would get paid on a reimbursement or advance basis, only to find out that we needed to front the money.
Okay.
That was the
Sure. So that's why it created the little misunderstanding, no? I mean, misinformation with me. But again, going back to the 702, it's under consideration right now. Liz, I agree. No apprehension because of with the grant conditions low. I think if we can ask your office to propose this question to OIA, it says this is something that's being considered, and I think it can work. Otherwise, if we can guarantee us here that this year everything is going to go to Rhoda, next year everything is going to go to Tinian, and the next 3 years everything is going to go to Saipan to finish all the, instead of like divvying up little by little to projects. I mean, it's a fair question to ask because again, like the last 40 years, we've been getting 702 funds consistently. And I'm not saying that we're failing. I'm just saying that there's other projects, competing projects that requires more closer attention as far as each senatorial district. But is that something that?
I mean, that's something we can explore, but we still need to comply.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, 2 million or 10 million, we still need to do our NEPA process.
So for example, we are successful with using this to service the loan. For example, I'm just, because I'm always optimistic that there's got a possibility. Is it safe to say then that NEPA requirement may not be an issue as far as projects if we are just going to use the MPLT to bridge it?
So how are we going to return the money to MPLT on the? Yeah,
Same concept.
But then would OIA approve the drawdown or even the grant if we are not in compliance with the grant terms and conditions?
Okay. I mean, I expected that answer. Yeah. So, but I'm just, we're at a situation right now where we're trying to, again, figure out the best possible options to service some of these projects that's lacking funds, no? And I have other questions, and I think I'm gonna yield for now. Mr. Chairman, if I may, is the time frame? Can you maybe Secretary of Finance? Can you enlighten the committee or the members of the Senate as far as time frame in terms of drawdown? Let's say, for example, there's a completed project. I'm talking about 702. There's a completed project. What's the process like? I'm the contractor. I submitted my billing or my report to Liz's office. Goes to you. What's the turnaround time as far as the receiving? Everything checks out. Then you draw down the money. What's the 2-3 months, 1 year?
I guess there's different starting points when you're talking about timeline in terms of the starting point for the vendor versus the starting point for the Department of Finance. So the vendor submits their payment application for approval to OPD, and from that time frame for the vendor, it depends on all the approvals of the engineers, DPW, until such point that their payment application is approved. Then it's submitted to the Department of Finance to be entered as an obligation or an invoice to be paid. Once that's entered, then the drawdown is requested. So in terms of my timeline for the Department of Finance is when everything is approved and entered in the system to be paid, that's when that's one starting point. And then as far as the submission of the drawdown request to the grantor, that's another starting point from there. So I would say from the time that the invoices are entered and approved and the drawdown is submitted to the vendor for payment of those invoices, I would say 3 to 5 days. As far as the timeline from when the vendor submitted their payment application to OPD and DPW, that might be 30 days, 60 days, depends on the approvals of the engineers, whether it's something that we are willing to say, okay, the CNMI will pay for this work. Sometimes it goes back. I don't know, Liz, it gets rejected, goes back to the vendor to revise their invoices. All that time, all that review is not, we don't, that's not part of our process. But as far as everything was good to go, approved, submitted to the grantor for a drawdown, when we talk about drawdown, 3 to 5 days.
Okay, thank you, Secretary. Last question: is there any portion of the allocation through 702 paying a stipulated order for CUC? Any of the funds?
I don't think so, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you back?
Thank you. Right now, I recognize the co-chair for the first round.
Thank you, Chair. The first question is for Ms. Balahaja. Just so that I understand, I would like to get some clarification with regards to the TNM projects. Are they delayed because of funding issues, or are they delayed because of NEPA process, or both?
They are delayed because of the NEPA process.
So it has nothing to do with funding.
The funding is there.
Okay, thank you for that. The next question is to the Secretary of Finance. And because I'm hearing these issues regarding the NEPA process, those projects that are being funded by EDA that we're talking about to be covered by the line of credit, are any of those projects affected by NEPA?
Obviously, I wasn't there when they submitted the application and to the process and the grant, but I would think that they have complied. Every federal grantor has their own NEPA reviewer. I'm assuming that they must have complied with their NEPA requirements because the grant was awarded.
So the only way that the grant would be awarded is if the NEPA process has been fully reviewed and approved. And I'm just...
It's probably already complied with, because now we're into construction and we're in the design phase.
I understand that that's the assumption, but what I'm afraid of is that because there's this agreement, right, with the 30-day turnaround to repay the drawdown from MPLT, I'm concerned that if we are not absolutely sure that those projects that were listed to be covered under the line of credit have already been thoroughly vetted, that it might cause, we might run into some of the problems that Tinian is faced with right now. So I think before we even move forward with the line of credit, that we need to be absolutely sure that every single project that's listed on that list is thoroughly vetted. Go ahead.
In terms of environmental requirements, like Liz said, we are in construction for Garapan. However, the other projects, we are not yet in construction. And when construction happens, I know Liz had mentioned there's things that happen that we don't know. Maybe they find bones or something else that would delay the project. However, in terms of the LOC, we do not request money from MPLT unless we get a pre-approval of from the grantor, meaning the LOC will not be touched unless there is guaranteed funding from the grantor. And so when the project is ongoing, all of those findings are communicated with the grantor as they go through the construction process. They review all the invoices before we even go to MPLT to draw. So as far as your concerns about the LOC not being paid, we won't even get that
Get that.
money until the construction or any invoices are already approved by EDA. That's the reason why we developed that process.
Okay,
To
great.
protect from that.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. That's all I have, Chair.
Recognize Senator Babauta.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments I've been hearing so far. Some of our members' concerns, and they're valid. One thing I did want to comment on is, and I appreciate Senator Jude's thinking out of the box to try and come up with solutions for delayed projects. And we understand better now that it is the feds that's delaying the projects in Tinian. And I do appreciate Senator Jude asking Ms. Balahaja if they can go back to OIA and at least explore the possibility of, turning over 702 funds as a guarantee to get or get the MPLT line of credit first, and when the 702 money comes in to pay it, that type of scenario. And I really do appreciate Ms. Balahaja being able or agreeing to explore that. But I think that, and as Ms. Balahaja alluded to, that is, in my mind, is circumventing the whole requirement process with OIA. And we're not even talking about EDA projects yet. But I think, and if OIA gets wind of that type of scenario, it jeopardizes future OIA CIP projects, in my opinion, as to the CIP project 702 funding being decreased over the years. I worked under the late Lieutenant Governor Benjamin Manglonia, who negotiated the 702 fundings the first and second years at least. And at one point, we were getting approximately 26 million. And at that time, initially, we were required to match it 50-50. And late Benjamin Manglonia further negotiated that matching and decreased it until eventually, over the years, there was no more matching from the CNMI government. So thankfully, for visionaries like the late Lieutenant Governor Benjamin Manglonia, we were able to get that agreement from OIA. And as to Senator Cruz's also, option to include 702 funding in this line of credit bill in order to come up with a speedier process to move on projects in the second senatorial district. Ms. Balahaja was here, in prior weeks and stated that that language is unnecessary because the 702 funding is a different source, and we are convoluting, this line of credit bill that we need to pass in order to move those projects in Garapan, in not only on Hotel Street, but the cultural center, the Oleai Sports Complex, and others that have been pre-approved already by EDA. It is unfortunate that EDA changed the rules midway through the game and now requires that we upfront the costs, and they will reimburse us for it, including the interest. And there, I have other arguments which I will reserve at this time. With regard to the proposed amendment that Senator Carl King Neighbors introduced, with respect to including a $5 million loan on top of the $15 million line of credit. I will reserve my arguments on that for later on, but I appreciate the healthy debate we're having now. And I hope that all the members take into consideration all the arguments presented and be logical and rational about how to go about this line of credit bill, because it has been delayed in the Senate for weeks now, and we can't seem to move forward because amendments keep getting inserted into it and being convoluted from its original intent. That's all I have for now. Mr.
Thank
Chairman, I
you.
will yield my other arguments for later.
Thank you, Senator Walter. Just clarification: the amendment hasn't been introduced yet. So at this time, I recognize Senator
No?
Paul Manglonia.
Thank you, Chairman and Chairwoman. Before I actually ask little specific questions, can I just ask? Because, we're talking about line of credit for these 12 projects. I'm just concerned that who decided on this? Who decided on the EDA projects and who initiated it? And I forgot to put, Rhoda and Tinian projects. I'm just really concerned because, for example, for revitalization project, they should have thought of maybe Pinatan Park and Songsong Village Street, right? Or for the sports complex, they could have thought of our gymnasium and all that. So I just want to hear more from I guess you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you for your question, and I, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I believe that question was brought up, and I really apologize because I wasn't involved, or we weren't involved at the time. But I recall that Mr. Mariano Iglesias had been working for EDA at the time, and I guess this grant is, doing it's called a disaster grant, right? And so, I had hope, or I hope that he did, reached out to all our islands, really. So I guess I don't know how to answer that, Senator, and we will get you.
I guess I'm just thinking, in the future, how we can also be part of the decision in distributing 100 million CIP project, for example, and the other senator district not being considered in the decision making process. It's just very concerning because even with the disaster relief funding of 90 some million also, Rhoda didn't get anything. They got zero funded. And fortunately for that flex fund identification, I think we appreciate that we got a couple $1 million from there. But there's something wrong when our government looks at all the infrastructure needs of the senator district and then leave out the other districts. So that's something that we need to revisit the executive grant offices, the various grant offices, so that not only to consider the other senator district, but to coordinate it, right? Because right now it seems like there's several offices that are handling, interrelated projects, right? So I just want to point that out, that it's very concerning. And so going to the CIP projects, 702 funding, you mentioned, Director Liz, that there's this competitive expenditure rate, right? And so I guess the question by Senator Jude is not really to circumvent so much the environmental assessment requirement, but rather to kind of like so that we can spend the money, and not only would the community and the people benefit, but we can also improve our grading, right? Because we're competing with the other insular areas. And so if we can do some kind of bridge financing and we can accomplish the CIP project, then the faster we can use the 8 million. And so next year we might get 10 million, right? Because the total, I understand, I don't know if is it correct, 26 or I believe 22 million for the whole insular areas that we're competing with, right? Something like
Right.
22 million
Yeah.
for Guam, Americans, all the other insular areas. So may I ask, just a side question, who has the best record? Who has the best report card as far as expenditure rate among the insular areas?
What I see is American Samoa.
American Samoa. And they also have environmental issues, right? They still have to do the same
Yes.
thing. So maybe we should visit them and ask them what they're doing right, how they're moving their projects, because this issue about the expenditure rate, I believe I've mentioned it, 4 or 5 years ago, about how, and I believe it was from a letter by our present U.S. Congressman Kilili that uh, that I raised this up, because he wrote a letter and to Public Works 5 years ago, and I pick up on that letter and I started also bringing it up every opportunity I can. And so um, 8 million, if we can get 11, that means we're losing 3 million every year that we could get if we spend our money, and if we will get that additional funding, plus we will get the benefit of the infrastructure in place already. So it's not so much to circumvent the environmental assessment, but like in one project, Director, I brought up to you, like for the Doogie Homestead. If we ask for it as an infrastructure improvement for the homestead, then they say they require environmental assessment. But that project that we're trying to do is just to the entrance, not only to help the homesteader, but to help the farmers along the way, right? So we can probably get it as inventory, like I mentioned, like water lines. And so we give the water lines to CUC, and then they as they always do it, install the water line. And that's not to say that they don't have to go through the environmental permits or the fish and wildlife permits, right? So I don't think so much to circumvent, but to allow us to move forward with the funding. So so this is something that I think Senator Jude's question, to follow up, I think we can ask them, right? Because can I ask, why is it that they're reluctant to give CUC in terms of supplies? Uh, for example, instead of doing um, I don't know how much it costs to get the water line there, let's say 800,000, versus just buying the pipelines and giving it to CUC. Is that something that OIA has difficulty in approving?
So I think we brought that up in our monthly meeting with OIA, Senator. And we're taking a different route now, where we will just say we're going to put a Doogie water line for the people adjacent to the roadway, which could lead us to the entrance of the subdivision, but not necessarily to say to connect it to the subdivision. And maybe that could be done later on. But if we can just install that water line along that roadway, we've identified, the number of owners or agriculturists that are using the properties adjacent to that Doogie water line. So as we speak now, we're
waiting for them to approve that.
yes.
So that's why it's critical that we talk to OIA then and see like something like that. If we know it's actually forthcoming, we could use bridge financing so we can move already today with the project, for example, right? Knowing that it will be approved once we have a sense of their policy. So I think it's important that we ask them for something like that where we know that they will approve, but it's going to take 3-4 months to approve, and we can then have some kind of a revolving fund. We can then address our critical needs immediately, right, upon determining that such project is greatly needed. So this is an example, a small example, but I think that the advantage of finding whether this can be done is that then we can take multi-year allocation for the senator district and make it a bigger project so we can address some of these needs in the island, because one of the needs that, for example, not in 702 but in Federal Highway is the road, perimeter road around the backside of Rhoda. We know that Federal Highway will never move forward and fund a project as long as there are encroachment issues. They want to actually have the government take the land. But you know, if we can take care of that locally, because I know that landowners have signed, for example, authorization for the government to have the road be built, but it's just take time for them to make an agreement on land exchange or land compensation for money, you know, we lack of money or I guess appraisal issues. So but locally we're okay, they already authorize us to use the land, and they're also happy because their land value maybe will go up, and also they have a better road access. So something like that, if we deal uh, with some financing, we can complete the road. And once we complete the road and we can prove the value that it's 5 million, as long as they reimburse us that, I guess they wouldn't have any issue with environmental, because that's our government, of course, is concerned. We work with the federal agencies. And so that way we can actually be spending our 702 money ahead of time. In fact, we might be spending 3 years allocation ahead if we can do this front end uh, financing, right? And do multi-year. So I appreciate if we can maybe work with our legal counsel in your office and maybe get a letter and then maybe get a meeting with them and see whether this can be done. I know that over the years that's not being done, but I think that we need to maybe continue to look outside the box, right, and see whether that would be allowable. So and again, that will help us with our expenditure rate, so we can have a better, you know, result on our ratings. Um, Chairman, I'd like to ask the secretary. You said guaranteed funding from the grantor. You use that term to say that the this line of credit will not be initiated unless already you have been informed that this phase of the project has been approved, right? So there's no risk actually for MPLT, because if you do the project, you get paid. It's already been approved. Um, is that provision in place when they did the Typhoon U2 15 million line of credit? That there must be first guaranteed funding authorization, uh, or they just gave them 15 million, or they go project by project on the Typhoon U2? How did MPLT release the line of credit funding?
Thanks for that question, Senator. As you know, I wasn't around at that time that the funding was negotiated and the terms. You were asking about the terms, whether it was included. However, I do recall that the funding was issued in 2 separate deposits to the CNMI. How those deposits were justified to MPLT, I would have to check on that.
Because that was originally a line of credit, right? Because they justified that, we get this money, we'll pay you back. So obviously there was no condition for guaranteed funding from the grantor, right? So in this legislation, is there such a language there? I know you're saying it to us, but is there a language, maybe the legal counsel?
I think, thank you, Senator and Trace, if I may. I believe that that is a requirement that MPLT is going to have on our administration. So what we've been doing lately with the gap and revitalization is like the CNMI pays out 300,000 to the contractor or 200,000 to the contractor. What we do is we package a reimbursement package first, and we send it to EDA, to the project officer, whoever's handling our project. And we have an agreement that they will review all the documents, and then they will have a conditional approval, meaning that the only time they'll approve for payment is when they see a proof of payment. So I think that's a guarantee on the EDA part. And so as soon as finance issues the check to the vendor and the vendor acknowledges receipt, that's all we need to send to EDA and say, EDA, here is the proof of payment. And then they process their reimbursement and we get it, 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, that's good for EDA because they know that you pay them, but how does MPLT get the assurance before issuing the money that even though you did all those, that they'll get reimbursed and you pay them?
So I believe the security that they are asking to have in place is the interest income withholding. That was the purpose.
Yeah, and that's why we're concerned
Yeah.
because we don't want what happened to Typhoon U2 line of credit to happen here, right? We don't want to be circumvented, the legislature, from approving that in the future because it's easy to say, all right, just wash it away, right, with the future interest income. So that's why I'm asking what kind of language we need to put to make sure that when that line of credit money is used, it's used for a funding that we know is going to get reimbursed. There's no question it's going to get reimbursed, and so we ultimately get paid.
If I may, Senator, it works in MPLT's favor and the mechanism that we have in place because it is in our interest to complete the projects. And they will only approve one drawdown at a time. So it is in our best interest to repay that drawdown if we want to continue using the LOC to complete the projects. That is why they are not upfronting the whole 15 million. It's on a request by request basis. And so if we want to complete our projects, which is our goal and our whole purpose of the LOC, then we must stay compliant with the repayment within the 30 days and with the interest. And so you are asking what is the guarantee that the CNMI repays MPLT. At some point, there has to be some sort of trust between the two entities that we share a mutual goal of completing the projects. Otherwise, the penalty will be the interest that the CNMI has to bear, whether it's paid by the grant or whether it's paid by the CNMI. So again, it's at the end of the day, we want to get the projects done. So that is what's in place for finance.
So at the end of this 98 million, you probably still have some maybe 10 million line of credit, then there's no more incentive for you to pay. You just say, all right, just take it and wash it away with the 2 million every year, right? There'll be incentive along the way, but at the end, there wouldn't be incentive.
Well, it wouldn't be a good financial decision because then there's interest that we have to pay on that outstanding amount. And so again, we just have to focus on completing the projects and staying compliant and keeping our word with MPLT.
Okay. That's all for now, no, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Thank you.
We're still in the first round, and I recognize Senator Carl. Members, it is now 12:14. I know there may be some follow-ups. We'll finish up with all the follow-up questions, and then we'll recess, and then we'll come back for the markup on the bill. And so at this time, for the second round, I recognize members to ask questions. And I recognize Senator Bauta and then the co-chair.
Just listening to the line of questions that Senator Paul was asking of Ms. Balahaja, I just wanted to ask, you keep mentioning that the Doogie project in Rhoda, that you could possibly fund the water line up until the entrance of the Doogie subdivision, right? The homestead. Why stop there? Why are we hearing that you would only fund or work for that?
Because we were told that anytime we work for the subdivision, we need to do an environmental assessment.
And there is none for the.
Well, we're
Doogie.
hoping that it is not, sometimes it's the verbiage, or we're hoping that we're just going to put in the water line for the adjacent sites of
Okay.
the roadway,
Yes.
just on the main roadway, because it's already an existing roadway.
But wouldn't DPL, and I'm, please feel free to answer if you can, and I know it's in DPL's jurisdiction, wouldn't they already have all these regulatory requirements in place before they even issue homesteads out?
They do, but it still needs to go through the OYA NEPA.
Federal
Yes.
requirements. Okay.
And we've shared with them whatever that we got from DPL.
And that wasn't satisfactory to OIA?
No.
Thank you. I yield.
Next up is the co-chair, then Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarification and from our understanding, right now EDA is requiring us to pay it up front and then they'll reimburse, correct?
Yes,
That's what's being requested of us right now. And I believe I heard earlier that prior to that, that wasn't required of us. We didn't have to pay up front and then get reimbursed.
I think that was the assumption when the grants were proposed or requested.
So it has always been this process where we pay up front and then we get reimbursed
With
It wa-
EDA.
with
Yes.
EDA. So it was never the case where we would submit for drawdown and they would just pay it.
Again, this is an unprecedented level of awards from EDA. Their awards are usually much smaller, and so we assume that when these projects were submitted, that maybe there was a misunderstanding at that time of what was required of the CNMI when we were submitting the projects.
So are these projects that are listed on that list, they've been ongoing even prior to this request for line of credit, right? And how were they being processed before? Like, were we paying it and then requesting for reimbursement, or we were submitting the invoices for drawdown and paying it? What was the process prior to this line of credit request?
I think, thank you, Senator Magofnia, but the only projects that we're being involved with under the Office of Planning and Development is the Garapan Revitalization and the Sports Complex. And those we actually just paid them like last week or 2 weeks ago. So they haven't been paid for like as long as maybe 4 or 5 months ago. You know,
I guess I'm just trying to understand what was happening in the beginning and where we are now and what changed. Now, I'm trying to understand what changed that made EDA require us now to pay up front and then they'll reimburse us.
I just want to clarify, there is no change. It was
Okay.
it was always a requirement, and so it just became more. I guess we're more aware of it as the cost of the project start to increase. Before it was just the cost of payroll, and a lot of the offices, I believe, are new for the project managers and the admin staff of each project. So as the cost started to grow with one project moving forward, the contracting done for the A&E, and then the invoices starting to come in unpaid because now then, the communications go back and forth with EDA and they're saying, we need your proof of payment.
Got it.
And
So
then
with
that
the-
brought us to MPLT.
With the
and
increase
to
of
where we are
cost,
today. Yeah.
I'm assuming that the government is having a hard time, is
Yes.
challenged financially to meet those obligations, and this is why we are where we are. Got it. Okay. So that clarifies that. Thank you. And then the second follow up is so I get it. MPOT wants the protection in place, to collateral the interest income should the government default. And right now, as it obligated for the U2 loan, but with the way the statute is, right? So supposedly that money is to be remitted into the general fund for appropriation by the legislature. So we got MPOT squared away, right? Because we have the collateral. We have the central government kind of squared away because even if they defaulted, there's a cushion. Where is the protection for the legislature as far as appropriation? Because MPOT will be taken care of by having access to that interest income. The central government's like, well, we defaulted, so they have their payment through the interest income. Where is the protection for the legislature? Because we're supposed to have access to that money every year to appropriate as we see fit. But it seems like everyone else got taken care of and not the legislature.
Senator, if I may repeat the question, where is the protection for the legislature? Is
Right.
that the question?
Right. So if the central government defaults, MPOT is taken care of because all of the interest income will be used to offset the remaining, the loan, right? And then does the central government have any, would there be any repayment sort of concept to the legislature so that we can use that money to appropriate? Normally, if we weren't in this situation, right, the legislature would have access to to those funds for us to appropriate as we see fit. But because now this interest is tied up, right, by the previous loan, the legislature is really missing out on those additional funds that we could have been appropriating to, the different entities that we feel is, that could use those monies. So I guess what I'm saying is, MPOT will be taken care of. Does the government have any plans to give the legislature the money that's supposed to be coming to the legislature for appropriation?
If I understand, I mean, I understand the concept that you're talking about. And as far as protection for the legislature, I believe you hold the power of the purse, and it's the debt authorization that we're here for. And so in your discussions and in you passing the law, you are authorizing that future revenues received by the government will be authorized to repay any sort of debt, whether it's a bond
Okay.
or an LOC. So I guess I don't understand the question about protection for the legislature.
Okay, maybe this is more a conversation for the members and
Yeah,
the lower
yes.
house. I was throwing it out there because I was just kind of thinking ahead that what if the administration has any plans. I mean, the hope is that they will not default, right? Because that would be irresponsible. But sometimes things happen, and I'm just trying to think ahead that if that should happen, what happens to the legislature, that
Mm.
authority that we have to appropriate whatever the $1-2 million that it's not much, but it's something, right? And those funds could be appropriated to, let's say, maybe help medical referral or whatever other entities that really do need the money. So maybe that's more of a conversation to have with the members of the legislature. Thank you, Secretary. Ayo.
Thank you, co-chair. I recognize Senator Cruz and then Senator Paul.
Mr. Chairman and Secretary, you mentioned earlier about in order for the administration or finance to request a drawdown and to be reimbursed, it has to have a guarantee from the grantor. You mean, I'm kind of confused. You mean this awarded funding from EDA is not guaranteed?
It's awarded, but in terms of guaranteeing the transfer of funds. So they've awarded, they've obligated the funds, right? But those funds can be held if they don't agree with how we expended the money. Or it can
Yeah.
be held for
That-
any reason, right? They don't have to approve our request.
That's my
That's the guarantee that
that's
I'm
my
talking about.
my concern and question to MPOT is why they're requesting a withhold unless they don't guarantee EDA, but it's awarded unless the government don't comply with the process, right? Like you spend the money. That's why earlier was mentioned, asked question by floor leader in regards to why do we have to have a seed money to proceed forward with the project when it's already awarded. And that's what I asked in the beginning of our discussion a couple of or last month when we had a discussion here in regards to the first time that we passed the first MPLT line of credit. So that's why I'm wondering, why do we have to have a seed money when it's already awarded? So I'm hoping the meaning of that is we have already that funding for the cinema because we don't have the money. So now that we are requesting for a line of credit, because in order for us to get reimbursed with the awarded fund. So maybe that's the reason why MPOT want a collateral or for payment to withhold the interest earned, right? And I think I'm a little bit confused of how is this process work when we are awarded and we have to have a and now you're saying that unless we will not do a LOC unless the grantor guarantee that we will reimburse the cinema. So the thing is, you won't be reimbursed if you don't spend, right? And submit the invoice of whatever the project that you spend in order for cinema to receive, right? So we have to follow the due process of what they want, right? So I think for me, it's not necessary to withhold that if we comply, if all of us comply with what is required to be reimbursed, right?
I believe, Senator, they want additional security for the line of credit. I can't speak for MPLT, but to clarify what I mentioned earlier about the guarantee is we will not touch the LOC without the guarantee from the grantor that they approve the invoices to be paid. It's not that we will not do the LOC, it's that we will not touch the LOC unless the grantor approves those invoices. For example, if we provided invoices to EDA for pre-approval that includes the cost of construction and maybe some invoices for some TVs, they will not approve the TVs, but they'll approve the construction. And that's the requirement, or that's the reason why we have the pre-approval process. So we know out of the 1 million that we're requesting, they're not approving 20,000 in TVs.
Because
And that's what MPLT would like to see, the pre-approval first before we go to MPLT and say we want $1 million. And so it's all these checks
thought-
that are in
I
place.
thought the other way around. You spend, then you reimburse.
Before we pay, let me just back up a little bit. Before we even go to MPLT, we have a package. This is what Liz was saying earlier. We have a package of invoices that are ready to be paid. EDA will review those invoices, whether they are approved, authorized, eligible under the grant. And then we take those pre-approvals to MPLT and say, okay, now these are ready, pre-approved, guaranteed to be paid. Now can we take from the LOC? And the LOC will provide us the funds. We pay those invoices. Then EDA will authorize the transfer of funds. We take the funds and pay back MPLT.
Of course, we have to put the authorized, right? We don't want to put down something that is not authorized, right?
Yeah.
Of course, if you put something that is not authorized, it's not going to be approved.
Yes.
So
But that's just
unless
the
we
extra
have
check.
unless we have a record with the feds that there's some
Unallowable
unauthorized that is
costs, yes.
submitted and we are being blacklisted.
I understand MPLT's position in needing the additional checks, the additional pre-approvals that are not normal to the process, but they will do it. It's all part of ensuring that the funds are used in the way that we say that they will be.
Because I keep asking that question, why do we have to seed money and then now we have to pre-approve without even spending?
It's a requirement of the grant.
Yeah. So Senator, we had one, there's an instance where we pay our employees out of a grant. And when we request for reimbursement, of course, we need to monitor their time. And when we don't submit a proper activity report and they're working for other tasks other than the grant, they'll come back to us and
I understand
disapprove
that, but this 12 or how many of this project it's already awarded, so specifically for that project. Of course, you're not going to include other sideline project that will not be reimbursed, right?
Yeah, so also if we allow for additional work that is not approved yet by the grantor, let's say a construction and then said, well, we're going to build another shelter here, and that is not part of the approval by the grantor, then they won't pay for that.
Of course, we're not going to go that
Yeah.
way. We're going to stick with what is
Yes.
what is awarded.
Right.
That's it. Right? If we're thinking about change of order, for example, and it's not in that,
Yeah.
then we're going to have problem. So that's why I'm trying to comprehend this, because I'm kind of confused. Like you're mentioning, unless the grantor guarantee the reimbursement, and I'm worried about MPOT because you're trying to save that that withhold and do something about that. No, instead of using it as a collateral payment, let's stick and guarantee the EDA that they will reimburse because we comply with what is awarded. Otherwise, MPLT will continue to have worry in their mind that no, we need this. And I'm also worried about Tinian and Rhoda that we need that too. Because we don't have any other choice. We're not included in the, like what, we're not gonna continue to mention about whose fault is this, but let's try to work together and spread the wealth among the senatorial district. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. We have Senator Paul and then Senator Ju.
Yes, just quickly, Director and Secretary, because as you mentioned, Secretary, unprecedented award, no, 98 million. Would this affect future CNMI application for EDA? I mean, is it on hold now that we cannot work toward a new project tomorrow?
As far as I was told, no.
No. So who handles this EDA project? Who applies for it, and who? Just so you know, this clarification.
I think, Senator, anyone can apply for the EDA, and I think there's if you go through their EDA or even talk to an EDA, you can put in an open application.
So who in the government?
It could be the mayor's office putting in an application, and those applications that were granted went through the Office of Planning and Development.
So planning and development.
So planning and development could assist in
This is that's why their office was created,
applications.
right? And that's under your
Right now
direction
it
now.
is. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's something that all the delegations from the Senator District can start having conversation, right?
Yes.
And it's helpful because you also handle 702, so we can coordinate
Yeah.
all of this. And so that's good to hear that it will not put on hold future projects because of the big amount. And also, what about the EPA $52 million? Is that also, is there a requirement, a similar requirement that we pay upfront?
No, there is, we charge against the grant.
Okay.
So there is an approved work plan by EPA,
Okay.
For all three islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Rhoda. Right now, there's a big balance, but it's a contingent upon an approval of the comprehensive solid waste management
Okay.
plan, which
Uh,
EPA is now currently
yeah.
reviewing.
And originally, from Congressman Kilili's office, this money was supposed to be distributed with all the senator districts. So I just ask respectfully that we kind of keep that in mind, an allocation, a fair allocation for the senator district. And finally, Mr. Chairman, I just want to address just for a short while the concern raised by Richard Schneider and Liana. I just want to say that even if this bill were to pass, the hopefully the 2 point whatever million, 2 to 3 million, that is transferred to the general fund from MPLT and interest income. If tomorrow the constitution is changed and they allow for the usage of that fund, other than giving it to the general fund, regardless what happened with this bill, that money should still be there if this bill is written in such a way that we make sure that this is paid. So that interest income will still be there after, I guess, Typhoon U2 line of credit, right? So that's why we're having this discussion so that we try to protect that and give it to the general fund as the Constitution now demands. But should there be a change and redirection of those funds, we hope that then that will occur. So I just want to mention that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Paul. I recognize Senator Jude.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, we don't do anything with this repeal and reenactment. There's already a law to authorize such. Has there been an action of payment made to any of the projects?
Yes, in terms of payroll, and the Garapan revitalization. These are only smaller invoices. Again, the purpose of the LOC is in anticipation of multiple projects going on at the same time, all with the same expiration date. And so we could utilize current funds to just keep funding one project at a time. However, we are in a time constraint with the expiration of the funds. And if we were to do it slowly, one by one, invoice by invoice, hoping that the general fund can support each invoice when they come in so that the projects get moved forward. I can tell you we are not gonna finish the projects in time. We are at high risk of losing the grant funds. And so I think it would be the most responsible thing, and it is, to advocate for an LOC so that multiple projects can move forward at the same time and get completed within the expiration date.
But you have an LOC already, right?
Yes, and the reason why we're here is because MPLT would like an additional security with the interest income withholding.
Is there anything within the context of the current statute that provides the flexibility from your office to provide a sweep account or whatever it is that is not prohibited in the current statute?
Like I said before, I've made the statement that there's nothing wrong with having a sweep account. Yeah, giving them full viewing access on the activities on the account. There's no problem with that.
So in other words, you're okay if like we don't move forward with any change?
I think yeah.
I understand. No, because you're
I
here.
think it's a matter of how can we move forward with MPLT.
Absolutely. And and again, I want to repeat this, because I repeated it, I think, a couple of sessions ago, that the decision that I actually supported this legislation, this adventure, it was that the interest earned is not compromised because there is a legislative initiative. And then again, because of the lack of an opportunity for the other senatorial district to dial in, but nevertheless, we're here today. I just wanted to kind of ask again one more time, no, Secretary. I know MPLT is not here, but we already gone through this hurdle, and none of this was mentioned during the initial one, and we supported it. And yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Senator Jude. Questions I have for Secretary of Finance is that I guess one of the reasons that this bill came back to both our committees is because there has been some proposals made to include either a line of credit or a loan to the first and second senatorial districts to address CIP projects, because it wasn't none of these projects were included in the EDA grants. Just looking at the drawdown schedule and looking at the maximum amount that we'll even need to draw down within any given month is about 12 million. Is there a reason why we would need the additional 3 million?
I believe Ms. Liz, thank you, had mentioned in the past, we don't, these are estimates. It's not concrete of the cost of construction at that time. And so the $15 million limit would allow us some flexibility should there come a month where there's a lot of construction progress that would require multiple drawdown requests up to 15 million. Again, based on our current projections, we don't anticipate to exhaust the LOC. But again, it's to provide that flexibility considering multiple projects going on at the same time. We're hoping that there's a lot of progress and we just need that flexibility.
So even with the flexibility, but has there been discussions with MPOT in regards to exhausting that 15 million, and would they allow the government to exhaust the 15 million if that's what the cost comes down to in a particular month? Because I think, discussions with MPOT amongst the members is that they've advised to break these larger projects into different smaller projects or smaller drawdowns. And so if that's going to be the case, then we can reduce that LOC to include opportunities for road engineer to avail of the difference Is that something that the administration can consider or would support?
We can consider that, of course. But again, based on the projected costs and just the unknown variable there on the what's going to actually happen once full-blown construction is going on, with all the projects, like you said, we have discussed with MPOT in terms of keeping the drawdown requests smaller, but we also have to consider that that means some vendors have to wait until others are processed first if we're given a smaller line of credit for these projects. So again, the $15 million was there in anticipation of no delays on all projects so that we could fund them all at the same time without any projects having to be delayed waiting for the other. But again, we can take that into consideration.
Okay. And for the record, what is the total? What's the maximum amount, whether it be through a loan or line of credit, that MPOT was initially willing to offer the CNMI?
Actually, willing to offer?
Was it just 15 or was it more than 15?
I believe we made the initial, or the governor had made the initial request for 20. The legislation passed at 15. So I know that the initial request was made.
Okay. And so at the end of the day, if this body decides to reduce the LOC to 15 to 12 even, is that something that would still allow the government to push forward with these projects? Or if anything, of the 15, can we reserve portions of that for CIP projects within the districts?
Again, like I said earlier, the more flexibility that we can have within the LOC, the better for all the projects. The authorization on whether to use them for CIP or for EDA, having that flexibility instead of a restriction on up to only 12 million would allow us to get the vendors paid on time and move all projects forward. So again, it's a revolving thing. The only unknown part is when everything is in full-blown construction mode. We don't know. We can't anticipate exactly. But our position is the more flexibility, the better, whether we can share, depending on the projects that are moving, the more flexibility, the better.
Okay. Thank you. Any final questions from the members? No, so that we can excuse them before we excuse them. No, I'm checking with the members first. Recognize Senator Babalta.
Thank you. Is it a requirement from EDA that there be a $15 million line of credit, or is that just something that the administration, is there a threshold that EDA required from the administration?
No,
In terms
EDA
of-
is not part of any financing negotiations.
That's it. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you. If it's okay with the members, I recognize Senator our fiscal analyst, Senator Mr. Demapon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to address this question to Secretary of Finance, Ms. Tracy. You have been mentioning that we need flexibility on the 15 million LOC, right? Looking at the drawdown schedule that OPD has provided this body, based on that drawdown schedule, there's approximately $87 million that will be requested to MPOT and will be financed out of this 15 million LLC for the next 7 years. Based on that 87 some million dollars, it would approximately finance 90% of that 98 million EDA projects, leaving approximately $8.7 million. On top of that, based on that schedule, I identified that approximately $1.9 million have been paid to date from those projects. Now, looking at the time horizon that this drawdown schedule is planned to take on, which is approximately 3 years and 7 months, and it would finance this 98 some million, approximately 90% based on that drawdown schedule. We're looking at approximately 10% more to finish this 98 or $96.2 million project. So what I'm saying here is that this $15 million line of credit has excessive sitting cash there every time there's a drawdown request. For example, for the first 9 months of the drawdown schedule, I'm saying that the average percentage for that line of credit amount to be sitting there is approximately 10 million or 73% of the time. So my question here is this: I think that limit of $15 million is excessive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Recognize Secretary.
Thank you, Chairman. The one thing I'd like to address is the excessive sitting cash, and I'm sure that is also a concern for MPLT. That is why they will only liquidate enough for that is needed in the near or the short term. We don't anticipate them to liquidate all 15 million in assets. Those assets will remain in investments and continue to earn interest while we don't use it. Going back to their recommendation that we request smaller amounts as we go so that they only liquidate small amounts and not have excessive sitting cash. So again, that is a concern we have considered, discussed, and agreed to their approach. So I hope that addresses that concern.
Thank you, Secretary. All right, if there's nothing else from the members at this time, Secretary Narita and Administrator Balahaja, you are hereby excused from today's committee meeting. Members, it is now 12:50. We will be back at 2:30. We will be back at 2:30 to mark up this bill. And so we are hereby in recess.